The Los Angeles County Courthouse was a furnace of heat and unease that sweltered through the air. Sweat dripped down the backs of the onlookers, and the weak hum of the air conditioner was no match for the oppressive weight of the moment. The smell of old wood and desperation clung to the walls, a reminder of the countless stories that had unfolded in this room. At the center of it all stood Judge Eleanor Hart, a woman whose years on the bench had sculpted her into an unflappable force. She surveyed the courtroom with practiced indifference, as if already knowing the outcome. 1,000 cases like this had passed through her hands, young men, reckless, from the broken streets of L.A., caught in the grip of choices that had long been made for them. Today, it was 19-year-old Marcus Reed, standing at the defendant's table in a suit that didn't fit quite right, his posture rigid, eyes flashing with a determination that spoke louder than any words. To the spectators, Marcus was just another lost soul, a boy bound to repeat the cycle. Whispers fluttered through the rows like the rustling of dead leaves. Another one gone, they muttered, their voices heavy with resignation. But Marcus wasn't finished. As Judge Hart prepared to deliver the verdict, a simple, yet chilling interruption cut through the air. "I'll speak for myself, Your Honor." The room fell silent. Prosecutor James Callahan, leaning back in his chair with the smugness of someone who knew victory was close, couldn't help but smirk. This was the final act in what he had already written off as a sure thing. Judge Hart's brow arched, her voice biting, "This isn't a school play, Mr. Reed." But Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, almost defiant, and something about the way he held it suggested a storm that was only beginning to gather. It wasn't just the usual case of a young black man from South LA, a place too often painted in broad strokes by the system, facing charges he didn't deserve. It was more than that. It was the weight of a system that had already made its decision, long before Marcus had the chance to defend himself. The prejudices that colored Judge Hart's judgments, the aggression in Callahan's eyes, and the jury that seemed half convinced of his guilt, these forces had already shaped the odds against him. But Marcus had one thing they didn't expect, the courage to stand alone. As the prosecution laid out damning evidence, his fingerprints on the steering wheel of a stolen BMW, a high-speed chase through dark alleys, Marcus remained unshaken. "I didn't steal it," he said, his voice calm, unwavering. "And I'll prove it." The room grew still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The jury leaned in, their attention now fully on the young man who had just thrown down a gauntlet they never saw coming. What did this kid have up his sleeve? The faded walls of Marcus's South LA apartment told a story all their own. Peeling paint, flickering lights, and the distant wail of sirens that never seemed to stop. It was a place where hope seemed to evaporate with every passing hour, where the scent of struggle lingered like the ever-present haze of exhaust fumes outside. Yet in the midst of it all, Marcus had found something that couldn't be taken away, the quiet defiance of his mother, Vanessa Reed. Vanessa, a paralegal who worked late-night shifts at a firm that didn't care about people like them, often came home with stories of a broken system, stories about crooked cops who bent the law to their will, arrogant prosecutors who played with lives like pawns in a game of chess. Every tale she shared planted seeds of defiance in Marcus's young mind, a thirst for justice that only grew as he did. His mother's words had always been his anchor, her strength a shield against the harsh realities of their world. At 12, Marcus had watched a friend's older brother get locked up for a crime he didn't commit, a case built on flimsy evidence, a conviction tainted by prejudice. The injustice of it burned into him, shaping the boy into someone determined never to be a victim. While others were out playing basketball, Marcus would sneak into the library, burying himself in law books, memorizing terms and cases that he could barely understand but knew were his lifeline. The more he learned, the more he saw the world for what it was, a place that would label him before he ever had the chance to speak. Vanessa, exhausted but unyielding, had always told him, "They'll judge you before you speak, but don't let them." Her voice, tinged with both love and wariness, had become his guiding mantra. Now, as he stood in that courtroom, her words rang louder than ever. She watched from the back of the room, torn between the pride of seeing her son fight back and the dread of what it could cost him. It wasn't just the system that had shaped Marcus, it was his mother's wisdom, her resilience. He wasn't merely surviving, he was fighting, armed not with fists, but with the sharp edge of his intellect. Every word he spoke in court was a testament to that. He had become something more than just a kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He was a challenger of fate, a symbol of resistance to a system that sought to bury him before he even had a chance to stand. As the trial loomed, a memory surfaced, a conversation from years ago. Vanessa, her face soft in the glow of a single dim light bulb, had said, "The truth's a weapon, but you've got to wield it right." Marcus clung to those words now, more than ever. They were the armor he needed as he faced the fight of his life. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the trial pressed on. The air grew thicker with each passing moment, the oppressive tension palpable. Wooden benches creaked under the shifting weight of restless spectators, their fidgeting a quiet testament to the rising stakes. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, marking the slow march toward a verdict. Prosecutor Callahan, with his usual self-assuredness, rose to present his key witness, Officer Travis Kane. The officer took the stand, his uniform stiff and his voice equally rigid as he swore under oath. He recounted the night he allegedly saw Marcus behind the wheel of the stolen BMW at precisely 11:47 p.m., his eyes narrowing as he described the chase that followed. Marcus sat motionless at the defendant's table, his fingers loosely interlaced as he focused on the officer, his expression unreadable. When it was his turn to cross-examine, he rose slowly, the room falling silent. "How far were you, Officer Kane?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but piercing. "Was it dark?" Kane faltered for a moment, clearly unprepared for the question. I was a block away," he admitted, his confidence slipping. Visibility wasn't great. Marcus's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "So, you couldn't see the driver clearly?" he pressed, his tone still calm, almost eerie in its restraint. The officer shifted, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Marcus pressed on, his next question sharp and deliberate. "And the fingerprints, Mr. Callahan? Where's the proof I actually drove the car? I touched it outside a bodega hours before." Callahan stammered, caught off guard. He hadn't expected the defendant to challenge the evidence so boldly, to push back in ways a typical defendant wouldn't dare. The prosecutor struggled to regain his composure, his usual arrogance replaced with unease. As the tension in the room grew, Marcus knew he was doing something dangerous. Each word, each question was a gamble. But the fire within him, fueled by years of frustration and injustice, pushed him forward. He wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was fighting for every person who had been silenced before they could speak their truth. And then, Marcus made his move. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. The courtroom went silent as he unfolded it carefully, revealing a handwritten note. He turned it toward the jury, then looked at Judge Hart with quiet confidence. "This," Marcus said, his voice steady, "is a note from Henry Brooks, the owner of the BMW. He claims a tall white kid stole the car. Not me." The room froze. Callahan leaped to his feet, objecting furiously, his voice rising in anger. "This is inadmissible. We have no proof of this note's authenticity." But Judge Hart, intrigued despite herself, didn't immediately rule it out. "I'll allow it," she said, her voice firm. "The jury can consider it." Vanessa, sitting in the back, watched her son with a mixture of awe and anxiety. She clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white with tension. The words slipped from her lips in a barely audible whisper, "That's my boy." The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions unreadable, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was Marcus truly the one who had stolen the car? Could the system be wrong, after all? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the balance of power shifting imperceptibly. The courthouse hallway buzzed under the harsh fluorescent lights, their hum an almost sinister backdrop to the tense silence that filled the space. Reporters hovered near the entrance, their cameras poised like vultures, waiting for the next angle, the next soundbite to feed their insatiable hunger for drama. It felt like the calm before the storm, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. Marcus leaned against the cold wall, his arms crossed, eyes locked on the floor. The weight of the moment, of everything that had transpired, was pressing down on him. Vanessa stood before him, her eyes sharp, her voice laced with concern. "You're risking everything, Marcus. You're playing with fire." He snapped back, his frustration boiling over. "I'm risking more by staying quiet. I won't let them bury me without a fight." His words were sharp, but there was something vulnerable in his eyes, a crack in the armor he'd carefully built around himself. Vanessa's gaze softened, but the worry in her voice remained. "I know, baby. But if you lose—" "I won't lose," he interrupted, his voice quieter now, though his determination still burned. His words rang in the air between them, but the doubt gnawing at Marcus's insides remained. He wasn't as unshakable as he seemed. Meanwhile, just down the hall, Prosecutor Callahan was pacing, clearly rattled by the unexpected turn of events. He huddled with Officer Kane, their low voices barely audible over the noise of the courthouse. "We can't let this kid get away with this," Callahan muttered, his tone sharp, the pressure of the case mounting. "Do whatever it takes to make this stick. We need him convicted." Kane nodded, his eyes darting nervously. "I'm doing everything I can, but that note—" He trailed off, as though even speaking it was risky. Judge Hart, who had been standing in her chambers nearby, overheard their conversation. The words lingered in her mind longer than she would have liked. Her certainty, her belief that Marcus was guilty, began to waver, replaced by a creeping unease. She knew better than anyone how fragile the justice system could be, how often the truth was manipulated, even when it was right in front of their eyes. Back in the hallway, Marcus struggled to control the chaos in his own mind. "Am I crazy to think I can win this?" The question echoed in his thoughts, a relentless drumbeat. For a moment, the courtroom, the stakes, the pressure, it all felt too much. A flashback slammed into him uninvited, a younger version of himself, just 15, standing in front of a mock trial in his high school classroom. The mock trial was supposed to be an exercise in practicing his future career, but it had turned into a humiliating failure. The judge, the jury, all had seen through his shaky arguments, his lack of experience. The crushing feeling of defeat had almost broken him, but then there had been his mother, her voice steady and unwavering as she pulled him from the depths of his doubt. "Don't let one failure define you," Vanessa had said back then. "You've got more in you than they'll ever know." That memory grounded him, but the question still lingered. Was he really ready to take on the system, to win a battle that felt so much larger than him? Rumors were starting to spread. If Marcus won, it could expose a pattern of botched arrests, cases where innocent people were caught in the web of systemic failures. The implications were enormous. If he lost, it would bury any hope of change, any chance to prove that the system could be held accountable. Callahan wasn't about to let that happen. The stakes were too high for him, and he was determined to crush Marcus, to silence the possibility of exposing the truth. And then, as if fate had conspired to give Marcus one last warning, he overheard something he shouldn't have. Down the hall, just as the doors to the courtroom creaked open, Marcus heard Callahan's voice, low and dangerous. "Find something, anything, to bury this kid," he said, his words dripping with malice. Marcus's heart raced, his pulse quickening as the gravity of the situation hit him like a tidal wave. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting a system that would stop at nothing to protect its own. The walls felt closer now, the weight of his struggle heavier. But there was no turning back. The courtroom was charged with an electric tension as the trial resumed, the air thick with anticipation. Sweat trickled down the backs of those present, and the usually muted hum of the overhead lights now felt oppressive. Every voice had fallen to a whisper, every gaze fixed on the front of the room, where the next moments could change everything. Prosecutor Callahan, still rattled but determined to regain control, rose with a grim smile. He held up a grainy security video, the image flickering on the screen behind him. A shadowy figure stood near the stolen BMW, its face obscured. "That's him," Callahan crowed, pointing to Marcus, his voice thick with certainty. He could taste victory. The video seemed damning, a final nail in Marcus's coffin. But Marcus was ready. With a calm that seemed impossible under the pressure, he stood up. "Objection, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pressing a few buttons before showing it to the court. "The timestamp on this video reads 11:20 p.m., Marcus continued. "I was texting my mom at 11:30 p.m. saying I was heading to the library. Here's the proof." The room went silent. Marcus's phone screen, displaying the text to Vanessa, was projected onto the wall for everyone to see. The proof was irrefutable. Callahan's face drained of color, his smirk faltering for the first time since the trial began. The defense had just turned the tables in a way he hadn't anticipated. The quiet buzz in the room grew louder, whispers rippling through the jury and spectators. Even Judge Hart's usually composed expression betrayed a flicker of surprise. Marcus had done what no one expected, he'd proven his innocence with more than just words. He had proven it with the truth. As the room still hummed with disbelief, Marcus took his place for his closing statement. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him, the future of his life hanging in the balance. "This isn't about a car," he began, his voice quiet but filled with an undeniable strength. "It's about a system that sees me as guilty before I even speak. They saw a kid from South LA, and that was enough for them. You can jail me, but the truth stays free." His words cracked with raw emotion, his voice trembling with the years of pain, frustration, and the memories of watching others fall prey to a system that refused to see them. The years of being labeled, of being ignored. It all rushed to the surface, and in that moment, it wasn't just Marcus Reed standing there, it was every person who had ever been unjustly accused. Vanessa, sitting in the back of the room, could no longer hold back her tears. Quiet sobs racked her body, and the jurors wiped their eyes, clearly moved by Marcus's impassioned words. Even Judge Hart, the stoic figure at the center of the trial, found her gaze shifting to the gavel in her hand. She gripped it tightly, as if it were an anchor, trying to maintain control in the face of something she hadn't expected. But the true blow came when Marcus's defense team, in their final push, put Officer Kane on the stand. Under the pressure of cross-examination, Kane's confidence finally crumbled. I didn't see him clearly," Kane admitted, his voice small, regretful. "I just assumed. I assumed it was him." The words echoed through the courtroom, and for the first time, the foundation of the prosecution's case shattered. Kane's admission destroyed the credibility of the entire arrest, exposing the fragile thread the prosecution had been hanging on to. The room was filled with stunned silence as the impact of the confession sank in. Judge Hart's gavel slammed down, the sound sharp and final. "Case dismissed," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension. Instantly, the courtroom erupted into chaos, cheers, gasps of disbelief, and the sudden flash of cameras capturing the moment. It was a victory, but it felt almost surreal. As the crowd noise died down, Judge Hart turned to Marcus. Her expression, once cold and distant, now held something else, something that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been in the trial. "You've got a future in this room, if you want it." Marcus, his heart racing, could barely find words. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself a breath. He had won. Not just his freedom, but a chance to change the very system that had tried to crush him. The future that had always seemed so distant and uncertain was now in his hands. As he looked over at Vanessa, their eyes met, and for a moment, there were no words needed. They had made it through, together. The blinding sun bore down on the steps of the courthouse, its heat a sharp contrast to the cool, steady calm that had settled over Marcus and Vanessa. As the crowd surged around them, eager reporters and onlookers jostled for a glimpse of the man who had defied the odds. But Marcus and Vanessa found their own quiet space, carving through the noise like a gentle wave cutting through storm-tossed waters. "Move out of the way," Marcus murmured, his body instinctively shielding Vanessa from the throng of cameras. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of everything they had just survived. "We're okay now." Vanessa, still shaken by the events that had unfolded, wrapped her arms around her son, holding him tightly as the relief flooded her. A shaky laugh escaped her lips, mixed with tears. "You're unstoppable, Marcus," she whispered, her heart finally feeling lighter, the years of worry and fear beginning to melt away. In the distance, Judge Hart stood in her office, her eyes fixed on the court below. She had been part of this system for so long, yet today had shaken her to her core. She hadn't expected to be moved by Marcus's words or his victory. But now, as she stared out of her window, haunted by past rulings, a sense of doubt settled deep in her chest. Her gaze fell on a file in the corner of her desk, an old case she had dismissed too quickly, another life that had been written off before the truth had been allowed to surface. She pulled it from the stack, her fingers tracing the pages with a newfound purpose. She made a silent vow to revisit it. The law, the system, it all needed to change. And maybe, just maybe, she had a part to play in that. Back on the courthouse steps, Marcus felt the weight of everything he had just experienced. What had once seemed like an impossible battle was now a victory, but he knew this was just the beginning. The fear that had once consumed him had been replaced by something new, purpose. "I'm going to law school," Marcus said, his voice steady and firm, as though the future had finally come into focus. He looked at Vanessa, his eyes full of determination. "Not just for me. But for everyone else, those who don't get the chance to fight back." Vanessa looked at him, her eyes softening as a flicker of hope replaced the years of worry. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but her son was no longer the scared, defiant teenager he once was. He was something more, something that gave her hope for the future, for the system that had failed him. The case didn't end with Marcus's acquittal, it ignited something much bigger. Protests and headlines followed, with the media calling him the teen who exposed the flaws in justice. Marcus, however, remained humble, determined not to become the symbol others wanted him to be. His focus was on the future, not the fame. He had a purpose now, and he wasn't going to let it be lost in the noise. At home that evening, as the quiet settled over their small apartment, Marcus sat on the floor, surrounded by old boxes and papers. His eyes landed on a law book, one that Vanessa had given him years ago, long before any of this had begun. He opened it slowly, flipping through the pages until he reached the inside cover. There, in her familiar handwriting, was a note. "For my fighter." A smile tugged at his lips as he traced the words with his finger. The weight of the world felt lighter in that moment. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was building something bigger than himself. He closed the book gently, a new sense of determination in his heart. The battle had been won, but the real fight was just beginning. And Marcus Reed was ready for whatever came next. The city beyond Marcus's window hummed with the quiet pulse of daily life, cars passing, the distant chatter of people, the occasional siren cutting through the evening air. But inside his small, cluttered apartment, there was only the soft rustle of pages turning, the low murmur of a streetlight casting a golden glow through the window, and the steady rhythm of Marcus's focus as he sat at his desk, surrounded by law books, his new world. From a courtroom showdown to this quiet, personal triumph, Marcus had turned the weight of suspicion into a weapon of truth. What had once felt like an impossible fight had become the first chapter in a new journey, one that wasn't defined by his past, but by what he was becoming. Every page he read, every case he studied, every law he memorized felt like another step toward a future he had once only dreamed of. But even as he studied, the echoes of the fight for justice remained with him, reverberating in his thoughts. The courtroom battle had been a win, but the war. It was ongoing. Justice, as he had learned, bent under pressure, but it didn't break unless we stopped pushing. Marcus had pushed, and the system had cracked. But who was next to fight? Who would take up the mantle, who would dare to challenge a system that was built to withstand change. Marcus's story was just one of many. His victory was personal, but it had sparked a question for anyone who had ever felt powerless, for anyone who had been silenced by the very system meant to protect them. It wasn't just about one person standing up, it was about all of us rising together. As Marcus paused from his studying, he looked out of the window, the skyline of Los Angeles glowing against the fading light of day. For a moment, he simply watched, taking in the city that had shaped him, that had tried to break him, and now, somehow, had become the backdrop to his transformation. This is just the start, he whispered to himself, more as a reminder than a declaration. The fight wasn't over. It was evolving. In the quiet of that room, Marcus understood something profound, that justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required persistence, courage, and the unwavering belief that truth, in the end, would always find its way through. The story of one young man had set something in motion, but it was far from finished. The echoes of justice, once faint, were now louder than ever.